In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a gunshot shatters the night, and Colonel Harrow lies dead in the vicarage, a cryptic coded letter clutched in his hand. What secrets did this ruthless man hide? Who, in this quaint village, would kill two? Keep them buried. Enter Miss Jane Marple, her keen eyes piercing the shadows of betrayal, blackmail, and wartime treachery. As whispers of spies and traitors swirl, can she unravel the cipher before the killer strikes again? The clock is ticking, and St. Mary Mead's darkest secrets are about to unravel. Chapter 1. The vicar's dreadful guest. The late afternoon sun draped St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, its rays filtering through the ancient elms that lined the lane to the vicarage. The village, with its thatched cottages and blooming roses, seemed to hum with the quiet contentment of an English summer. Yet, beneath this idyllic veneer, a current of unease rippled through the air, as if the very cobblestones sensed an approaching storm. Miss Jane Marple, seated by her window with a skein of pale blue wool, felt it too a prickle at the nape of her neck, the kind that often preceded trouble. She adjusted her spectacles and peered across the lane toward the vicarage, where Leonard Clement and his young wife, Griselda, were preparing for an unwelcome guest. Colonel Reginald Harrow, a retired officer with a reputation as prickly as the brambles in Old Man's Wood, was due for dinner. The village buzzed with whispers about him, a man of wealth and secrets, whose sharp tongue and ruthless land deals had earned him few friends. Miss Marple, ever observant, had noted the way his name tightened lips and furrowed brows at the village shop. A man like that, she mused, her knitting needles clicking softly, carries his own doom. At the vicarage, the dining room glowed with the warmth of polished oak and candlelight. Griselda, her auburn curls pinned haphazardly, fussed over the table settings, her usual cheer dimmed by nerves. "Leonard, must we have him?" she asked, straightening a silver fork. "He's insufferable, and you know he'll find fault with my cooking." The vicar, a lean man with kind eyes and a perpetually distracted air, sighed as he adjusted his clerical collar. "My dear, it's only one evening. Colonel Harrow is a parishioner, however disagreeable. Besides, he insisted on discussing some urgent matter, something about a letter he found in the study." Griselda's eyes widened. "A letter? In your study? What sort of letter?" "I haven't the foggiest," Leonard admitted, rubbing his temples. He was cryptic over the telephone, muttering about codes and secrets. "I dare say he's exaggerating, to unsettle us." Miss Marple, invited to join the dinner to balance the table, as Griselda put it, arrived promptly at 6. Her lavender dress and lace shawl gave her the appearance of a benign spinster, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. As she settled into a chair by the fireplace, she noted the vicarage's familiar comforts, the worn Persian rug, the scent of beeswax, the ticking of the grandfather clock. Yet tonight the air felt charged, as if the room itself held its breath. "Colonel." Harrow's arrival was heralded by a sharp rap at the door. He strode in, a tall man with a military bearing, his grey moustache bristling above a sneer. His tailored suit, though impeccable, seemed at odds with his weathered face, etched with lines of suspicion. In his hand he clutched a leather satchel, which he set down with a thud that made Griselda flinch. "Good evening, Vicar," Harrow said, his voice clipped. "Mrs. Clement and Miss Marple, is it?" His gaze lingered on her, assessing, before dismissing her as inconsequential. "Let's not waste time with pleasantries. I've matters to discuss." Griselda, forcing a smile, gestured to the table. "Dinner first, Colonel. I've made a roast." Harrow interrupted, his tone dripping with disdain. "I hope it's better than the last village affair I endured." Overcooked mutton and watery gravy. He sat heavily, ignoring Griselda's flush. Miss Marple's lips twitched, but she said nothing, her needles moving rhythmically. She observed Harrow's restless fingers, the way they drummed on the satchel, and the quick glances he cast toward the study door. Something troubles him, she thought. Something more than village gossip. Dinner was a strained affair. Harrow dominated the conversation, railing against upstart villagers and meddling bureaucrats who opposed his recent purchase of Meadowbank Farm. Leonard, ever the peacemaker, tried to steer the talk to parish matters, but barbs grew sharper. "Your wife's youth is charming, Vicar," he said, slicing into his beef with unnecessary force, "but it does make one wonder. A vicar's wife ought to be discreet, no whispers of scandal." A Griselda's fork clattered to her plate. "Scandal? What are you implying, Colonel?" Harrow smirked, leaning back. "Oh, nothing specific. Just that young wives in quiet villages often stir curiosity, especially when letters turn up where they shouldn't." Leonard's face reddened. "That's enough, sir. You'll not insult my wife in our home." Miss Marple's needles paused. Letters again. She glanced at Harrow's satchel, noting a corner of yellowed paper protruding. Her mind, as sharp as the pins in her bun, began to weave connections. Harrow's taunts were not idle. They were bait, testing reactions. But whose? As Griselda served deserter, trembling lemon syllabub, Harrow leaned toward Leonard, lowering his voice. "That letter I mentioned, Vicar, found it in your study last week when I borrowed your Plutarch. Odd thing, full of symbols. Codes, perhaps. Wartime. Business, I'd wager. Care to explain?" Leonard frowned, bewildered. "I know nothing of any letter, Colonel. My study is open to parishioners, but I assure you, spare me," Harrow snapped. "Someone in this village is playing a dangerous game, and I intend to find out who." Miss Marple's eyes flicked to the study door, half open, revealing a sliver of the oak desk within. She recalled Leonard's habit of leaving papers scattered, a temptation for prying eyes. A coded letter, she thought. Not Leonard's, surely, but whose? The evening unraveled further when Griselda, her patience frayed, excused herself to check the kitchen. Harrow's gaze followed her, his smirk fading into something colder. Miss Marple, feigning a cough, rose and moved to the sideboard, positioning herself to watch him. As Leonard fumbled with the coffee pot, Harrow slipped a hand into his satchel, withdrawing the yellowed paper for a fleeting moment. Miss Marple caught a glimpse of angular symbols, like a child's secret script, before he tucked it away. He's afraid, she realized. Not of the letter, but of what it reveals. The clock struck 9, and Harrow stood abruptly. "I'll take my leave. But mark my words, Vicar, that letter will cause trouble. Keep your study locked." He grabbed his satchel and strode out, leaving a chill in his wake. Griselda returned, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That man is unbearable. Leonard, what was all that about a letter?" "I haven't a clue," Leonard said, sinking into a chair. "But I'll check the study tomorrow. Perhaps I overlooked something." Miss Marple, her voice gentle, said, "I shouldn't worry, my dear. Colonel Harrow seems unsettled, but I'm sure it's nothing." Her tone was soothing, but her mind was alight. A coded letter in the vicarage. A man like Harrow doesn't rattle easily. Something is afoot as she bid good night and stepped Into the cool evening, the village was quiet, save for the distant hoot of an owl. Miss Marple's cottage was a short walk, but her thoughts were far from restful. She replayed Harrow's words, his nervous tics, the glimpse of that paper. Codes and secrets, she mused. The kind that get men killed. Her musings were shattered by a sound that froze her blood a sharp, unmistakable crack, like a whip in the night. A gunshot from the direction of the vicarage. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her steps were steady as she turned back, her shawl fluttering in the breeze. The vicarage door was ajar, light spilling onto the lawn. Inside, Griselda's scream pierced the air. Miss Marple hurried forward, her small frame belying her resolve. In the study, she found Leonard kneeling beside Colonel Harrow, who lay sprawled across the rug, a crimson stain spreading from his chest. His satchel was open, its contents scattered, but the yellowed paper was gone. "Jane," Griselda cried, clutching Leonard's arm. "He was here just minutes ago. We heard the shot and found him like this." Leonard's face was ashen. "Was in the hall, fetching my coat. I didn't see anyone. Oh, Jane, what's happened?" Miss Marple's eyes swept the room, taking in the overturned inkpot, the open window, the faint smell of gunpowder. Her gaze settled on a corner of the rug where a torn scrap of paper lay, half hidden by a chair. She knelt, her fingers deftly retrieving it. The scrap bore a single line of symbols, jagged and unfamiliar, like a code from another time. "Call Dr. Haydock," she said calmly, pocketing the scrap. "And the police. This is murder." As Leonard stumbled to the telephone, Miss Marple stood, her mind racing. The village would wake to chaos tomorrow, with whispers of scandal and fear. But she saw beyond the gossip, to the truth hidden in those cryptic symbols. Harrow knew something dangerous, she thought, and someone silenced him for it. She glanced at Griselda, trembling but resolute, and at Leonard, his faith shaken by the violence in his home. "Don't fret, my dears," Miss Marple said, her voice a beacon in the storm. "We'll get to the bottom of this." Back at her cottage, as the village stirred with the arrival of Dr. Haydock's car and the distant wail of a police siren, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the scrap of paper in her hand. Its symbols danced in the flickering light, a puzzle begging to be solved. She smiled faintly, her needles resuming their rhythm. A code, a murder, a village full of secrets, she thought. This will be interesting. The chapter closed with Miss Marple's resolve firm, her curiosity a quiet flame. St. Mary. Mead might never be the same, but Jane Marple was ready to unravel its darkest threads, one stitch at a time. Chapter 2. The cipher's first clue. Morning after Colonel Harrow's murder dawned grey and heavy, as if St. Mary Mead itself mourned under a shroud of mist. The vicarage, usually a beacon of warmth, stood sombre, its windows reflecting the village's growing unease. Miss Jane Marple, however, was undeterred. She sat at her breakfast table, a pot of Earl Grey steaming beside her. The torn scrap of paper from the vicarage study laid out like a challenge. Its jagged symbols and loops, like a forgotten script, stared back at her, defiant. "A cipher," she murmured, her eyes bright behind her spectacles, "and not a simple one." The village was abuzz with gossip. By 8 o'clock, the postmistress, Mrs. Cleet, had already spread word of the gunshot, embellishing it with tales of shadowy figures and cursed letters. Miss Marple, ever sceptical of rumour, knew the truth lay in colder, sharper details. She tucked the scrap into her handbag, donned her tweed coat, and set out for the vicarage. Her steps brisk despite the damp chill, Griselda greeted her at the door, her auburn curls dishevelled, her eyes red-rimmed. "Oh, Jane, it's dreadful," she said, ushering her inside. "The police are here, poking about, and Leonard's beside himself. They think it's robbery gone wrong, but I don't. Believe it. That letter Harrow mentioned, it's gone." Miss Marple patted her hand. There, my dear. Let's not jump to conclusions. Where's Leonard?" "In the study with that awful Inspector Slack," Griselda said, lowering her voice. "He's all bluster, accusing everyone from the butcher to poor Lawrence Redding." Miss Marple's ears pricked at the name. Lawrence Redding, the village's resident artist, was a dashing young man with a quick temper and a penchant for sketching in the churchyard. She recalled seeing him at the vicarage gate the previous afternoon, his face stormy as he argued with Harrow. Something to pursue, she thought, in the study. Inspector Slacker, wiry man with a bulldog's tenacity, stood over Leonard, who looked as if he hadn't slept. Papers were strewn across the desk, and the rug, still stained with Harrow's blood, had been pushed aside. "Miss Marple," Slack said, his tone curt. "This is a police matter. Civilians shouldn't meddle." "I'm merely visiting my friends," Miss Marple replied, her voice mild but her eyes sharp, "though I couldn't help overhearing. About a letter. Might I see where it was found?" Slack snorted. "Gone now, likely stolen by the killer. No use chasing ghosts." Leonard, wringing his hands, said, "It was on the desk, Jane. Harrow showed it to me, briefly yellowed, with odd markings. I thought it nonsense, but he was so agitated." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to the scrap in her handbag. "Perhaps I could assist. I've a knack for puzzles." Slack's scowl deepened, but before he could protest, a young voice called from the hall. "Aunt Jane, you're here." Dennis, Leonard's nephew, bounded in, his freckled face alight with excitement. At 16, he was all limbs and curiosity, with a mind as quick as his aunt's, though less disciplined. "Is it true about the murder? Was it spies, smugglers?" "Really, Dennis," Leonard said wearily. "This isn't one of your adventure novels." Miss Marple smiled. "Dennis dear, you're just the person I need. Would you help me with a little task? Something requiring sharp eyes and a clever mind." Dennis grinned, oblivious to Slack's glare. "Anything, Aunt Jane." She drew him aside, out of the inspector's earshot, and produced the scrap. "This was under the study chair last night. It's part of Colonel Harrow's letter, I suspect. Look at these symbols, do they remind you of anything?" Dennis squinted, his brow furrowing. "Gosh, it's like something from my history books. Those cipher spies used in the war substitution codes, maybe. Each symbol stands for a letter." Ms. Marple's lips twitched. "Very good, Dennis. I thought the same. Let's visit the vicarage library. There might be a clue to cracking it." As they left the study, Slack muttered about amateurs, but Miss Marple paid him no mind. The library, a cosy room lined with theology tomes and dusty novels, smelled of leather and ink. Dennis, eager to play detective, scanned the shelves while Miss Marple examined the desk where Harrow had sat. Her fingers traced the blotter, pausing at a faint indentation, a rectangular mark, as if a heavy book had rested there. "Dennis," she called softly, "look for a book that might have been moved recently. Something out of place." He rummaged, pulling out volumes with boyish enthusiasm. "Here's one. The Art of War by Sun Tzu. It's got dust on the edges, but none on the cover. Someone's handled it lately." Miss Marple took the book, her fingers brushing over its worn leather. She opened it, and a faint scent of tobacco wafted out, unmistakably Harrow's brand. Several pages were dog-eared, and certain words were underlined in pencil, forming a disjointed phrase: meet, shadow, 9. Ridge. Her pulse quickened. This is no coincidence, she said. These words are a message, hidden in plain sight. Dennis's eyes widened. A secret meeting. Golly, Aunt Jane, you think Harrow was up to something shady? Perhaps, she said, her tone measured. But we mustn't leap ahead. Let's try the cipher. If it's a substitution code, we need a key, perhaps something in this book. They spent an hour puzzling over the scrap, Dennis scribbling possible letter combinations on a notepad. Miss Marple, with her knack for patterns, suggested aligning the symbols with the alphabet, using the underlined words as a starting point. Slowly, a fragment emerged. Child, Dennis scratched his head. Child, that's not a word. It might be part of one, Miss Marple said, or a name. The rest of the letter would tell us more, but it's a start. Their work was interrupted by a commotion outside. Inspector Slack's voice boomed from the garden, where a small crowd had gathered. Miss Marple and Dennis hurried out, finding Slack questioning Lawrence Redding, whose paint-stained hands were clenched in defiance. I told you, Inspector, Lawrence said, his voice taut. I was sketching by the river at 8 last night. I didn't see Harrow after our row. Slack jabbed a finger at him. A witness saw you near the Vicarage gate at 8:30. Redding. Care to explain? Lawrence's jaw tightened. I was passing by, that's all. Harrow was a brute, but I didn't kill him. Miss Marple, standing at the edge of the crowd, noted Lawrence's flushed cheeks and the way his eyes darted toward the Vicarage. Guilty of something, she thought, but murder? Perhaps not. She caught Griselda's anxious glance and gave her a reassuring nod. As Slack marched Lawrence to the police car for further questioning, Miss Marple drew Dennis aside. We need to know more about that meeting place, Ridge suggests. The churchyard ridge, where the old oaks stand. Harrow's book points there. Shall we investigate? Dennis's face lit up, like real detectives. Lead on, Aunt Jane. They waited until Slack's car rumbled away, then set off for the churchyard, a short walk past the village green. The ridge, a low rise dotted with weathered gravestones, was shadowed by ancient oaks, their branches whispering in the breeze. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the ground, her memory conjuring the times she'd seen Harrow linger here, his satchel clutched tightly. Dennis, look for anything unusual, she said. A mark, a hiding place, something Harrow might have used. They searched, the mist curling around their ankles. Dennis, ever eager, poked among the roots of an oak. Aunt Jane, here, he called, holding up a small stone, its underside scratched with a symbol matching the scrap. Beneath it, the earth was freshly disturbed. Miss Marple knelt, her gloved hands brushing away dirt. Careful, dear. We don't know what we're dealing with. The soil yielded nothing. No letter, no clue, but the symbol confirmed her suspicions. This was a drop point, she said. Harrow was meeting someone, or hiding something. The killer may have beaten us to it. Dennis shivered, his bravado fading. You think the murderer's still out here? Not now, Miss Marple said, her voice calm but firm. But they're close. We must be cautious. As they returned to the village, the church clock chimed noon, its toll heavy in the fog. Miss Marple tucked the stone into her handbag beside. The scrap, her mind weaving connections. Harrow's cipher, the book, the ridge, They're pieces of a larger puzzle. She thought of Lawrence Redding's nervous glance, Slack's hasty accusations, and the missing letter. Someone in St. Mary Mead knows more than they're saying. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple spread the scrap and the book on her table. Dennis, hovering eagerly. "We've a clue, Dennis," she said, her eyes gleaming. "The ridge is where Harrow planned to meet someone, perhaps the night he died. The cipher will tell us who or why." Dennis grinned. "You're brilliant, Aunt." "Jane, what's next?" "We keep our eyes open," she said, "and our mouths shut. The killer thinks they've covered their tracks, but they've left us a trail." She tapped the underlined words in the book meat. "Shadow 9, Ridge. Tonight we'll watch." The churchyard, discreetly. The chapter closed with Miss Marple sipping her tea, her mind as sharp as the needles in her basket. The cipher's first clue had emerged, pointing to a secret meeting and a killer still at large. St. Mary Mead's. Quiet lanes hid a deadly truth, but Jane Marple was ready to unravel it, one careful step at a time. Chapter 3. Shadows in the churchyard. The twilight hung heavy over St. Mary Mead, cloaking the village in a veil of indigo as the sun dipped below the horizon. The churchyard, with its ancient oaks and weathered gravestones, stood silent, save for the rustle of leaves stirred by a restless breeze. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in a dark shawl to blend with the shadows, crouched behind a yew tree, her eyes fixed on the ridge where she and Dennis had found the marked stone earlier that day. Beside her, Dennis shivered, his usual bravado tempered by the eerie stillness. "Aunt Jane," he whispered, "are you sure this is safe?" Miss Marple's lips curved slightly, her voice a soft murmur. "Safe enough, dear, if we're quiet. The churchyard has stories to tell, and I suspect one is unfolding tonight." Her mind was alight with the clues from the past day, the torn scrap of cipher from the Vicarage study, the underlined words in Harrow's copy of The Art of War Meat. Shadow 9, Ridge, and the scratched stone marking a drop point. Colonel Harrow's murder, she was certain, hinged on the coded letter he'd flaunted. Now missing, and this ridge was the key to its secrets. Someone will come, she thought, to retrieve what Harrow left her, to ensure it stays hidden. The church. Clock struck 8, its chimes echoing like a warning. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles, her gaze sweeping the ridge. The mist had thickened, curling around the gravestones like ghostly fingers, but her sharp eyes caught a flicker of movementa, shadows shifting near the oldest oak, where the ground sloped toward the village. She nudged Dennis, who nodded, his breath catching. They waited, the silence stretching taut. Then a low murmur broke the stillness. Voices, hushed but urgent, drifting from the oak's shadow. Miss Marple strained to listen, catching fragments of words. Debt, promised, too late. The voices were familiar, yet distorted by the mist. One was deep, measured, the other higher, edged with panic. She signaled Dennis to stay low, her heart quickening. To people, a meeting, just as Harrow's book suggested. The deeper voice grew clearer. "You should have stayed away, Eleanor. This isn't your business anymore." Miss Marple's mind clicked. Eleanor Lestrange, the enigmatic widow who'd arrived in St. Mary Mead only weeks ago, her past as opaque as the fog around them. The other voice, she realized with a jolt, belonged to Dr. Haydock, the village physician, whose steady hands and warm smile hid a guarded nature. Mrs. Lestrange's reply was sharp. "Don't lecture me, James. You knew what Harrow was planning. You owe me after everything." "Keep your voice down," Haydock hissed. If anyone finds out, their words cut off as a twig snapped nearby, loud in the quiet. Miss Marple froze, her hand on Dennis's arm. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path, slow and deliberate, approaching the oak. The voices fell silent, and she glimpsed the figures melting into the shadows, their outlines swallowed by the mist. The newcomer paused, a silhouette against the faint glow of a distant cottage window. Miss Marple's breath caught as a glint of metal flashed in the figure's hand, not a weapon, but something small, reflective, a key. The figure knelt near the oak, scraping at the earth where the marked stone had been. Miss Marple's mind raced. They're looking for what we found or what's still hidden. She whispered to Dennis, "Stay here, don't move." Slipping from the EU's cover, she edged closer, her small frame blending with the gravestones. The figure, oblivious, dug deeper, muttering under their breath. The voice was muffled, but a single word stood out: code. Before Miss Marple could get closer, a sudden rustle from the bushes sent the figure bolting upright. They stuffed something into their pocket, a small object, barely visibly, and fled toward the village, their footsteps fading into the night. Miss Marple hurried to the spot, her gloved hands probing the disturbed earth. Her fingers brushed cold metal, and she pulled free a small, tarnished key, its head etched with a symbol matching the cipher scrap. Harrow's work, she thought. This unlocks more than a door. Dennis joined her, his eyes wide. "Who was that, Aunt Jane? Did you?" "See, not clearly," she admitted, pocketing the key. "But they were after this, and they weren't alone. Mrs. Lestrange and Dr. Haydock were here, discussing something delicate." Dennis shivered. "Spies, I bet." Harrow was mixed up in something big, wasn't he? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Perhaps, dear, but let's not weave tales before we have facts. This key is a clue, and we must keep it safe." They retreated to her cottage, the mist clinging to their coats. Inside, the fire cast a warm glow, but the chill of the churchyard lingered. Miss Marple spread the cipher scrap and the key on her table, her mind piecing together the nights. Events. The underlined words in Harrow's book had led them to the ridge, and now the key suggested a lock perhaps in the vicarage, where Harrow had been so fixated on the study. "Dennis," she said, pouring tea, "what do you know of Mrs. She's new to the village, and yet she seems entangled." Dennis shrugged, sipping his tea. "Not much. She keeps to herself, lives in that big house by the mill. People say she's a widow, but she doesn't act like one always watching, like she's waiting for something. And Dr. Haydock," Miss Marple pressed, her tone gentle but probing. "He's nice enough," Dennis said. "Patched me up when I fell off my bike last summer. But he's odd, sometimes goes quiet when anyone mentions the war. Dad says he was in the army, a medic or something." Miss Marple nodded, filing away the detail. A wartime connection, perhaps. Harrow was a colonel, after all. She examined the key, its etched symbol a mirror of the cipher's angular lines. This key might belong to the vicarage, she mused. Harrow was in the study often. There's a locked drawer in Leonard's desk. I've seen it. Dennis's eyes lit up. "Let's go now." "We could. Not tonight," Miss Marple said firmly. "The police are still crawling about, and we mustn't tip our hand. Tomorrow we'll speak to Griselda, discreetly." The next morning, the village was a hive of speculation. At the bakery, Miss Marple overheard Mrs. Cleet whispering about Lawrence Redding's arrest. The artist still under suspicion after Inspector Slack's interrogation. She bought a loaf of rye and lingered, catching snippets of gossip. A stranger seen near the vicarage, a rumour of stolen jewels, even talk of a curse on Harrow's name. Nonsense, she thought, but the rumours confirmed one thing: the village was watching, and the killer was likely among them at the vicarage. Griselda was pale but composed, stirring sugar into her coffee with a trembling hand. "Jane, it's awful," she said. "Slack thinks Lawrence did it, but I can't believe it. He's hot-headed, yes, but a murderer." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes on the study door. "What do you know of a locked drawer in there, my dear?" Leonard mentioned Harrow poking about. Griselda frowned. "There's one in the desk hold, always locked. Leonard says it's for parish records, but he's never opened it. The key's been lost for years." Miss Marple's fingers tightened. Around her handbag, where the churchyard key rested. "Might we take a look, just to be thorough?" Griselda hesitated, then nodded. "If it helps clear this mess, I suppose so. Leonard's at the church, and Slack's gone to question the butcher. Now's as good a time as any." The study was quieter now, the blood-stained rug removed, but the air held a lingering unease. Griselda led Miss Marple to the desk, a heavy oak piece cluttered with papers and hymnals. The locked drawer, set low on the right, was unremarkable, save for a faint scratch near the keyhole, as if someone had tried to force it. Miss Marple produced the key, its metal cool in her hand. "Let's see if this fits." The key turned with a soft click, and the drawer slid open, revealing a small leather journal, its pages yellowed and edges worn. Miss Marple lifted it carefully, her heart quickening. The first page bore Harrow's initials, R.H., and a date from the war years. Flipping through, she found lists of initials, J.H.E.L., R.C. End, cryptic notes about deliveries and codes. One entry, dated a week ago, read, "Meeting set, Ridge." 9. Trust no one, Griselda gasped. "That's Harrow's writing. What does it mean?" "It means," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but firm, "that Colonel Harrow was entangled in something dangerous. This journal and the key are pieces of his puzzle. We must keep them safe." As Griselda locked the drawer, Miss Marple slipped the journal into her handbag, her mind racing. The initials J.H. for James Haydock, E.L. For Eleanor Lestrange, suggested a network, perhaps from Harrow's wartime days. The churchyard meeting, the key, the cipher all pointed to a secret worth killing for. But who was the third figure, she wondered, and what did they take from the ridge? Back at her cottage, Miss Marple spread the journal and the cipher scrap. Before her, the key glinting beside them. The village hummed with its usual rhythms, children playing, the clatter of a milk cart, but she felt the weight of unseen eyes. The killer knows the letter is missing, she thought, and they'll come for the rest. She closed the journal, her resolve firm. The churchyard had yielded a vital clue, and the locked drawer had opened a door to Harrow's past, St. Mary Mead's. Secrets were unravelling, and Miss Marple, with her quiet wisdom and relentless curiosity, was ready to follow the trail. Chapter 4. The locked drawers, secrets the morning mist had burned away, leaving St. Mary Mead bathed in the crisp light of a July sun. The village bustled with its usual Rithermilk bottles clinking on doorsteps, the blacksmith's hammer ringing in the distance, but an undercurrent of tension lingered, as if the cobblestones themselves whispered of Colonel Harrow's murder. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her rose-scented parlour, sipped her morning tea, her sharp eyes fixed on the leather journal from the vicarage's locked drawer. Beside it lay the cipher scrap and the etched key from the churchyard, each a piece of a puzzle that grew more intricate by the hour. The journal, with its cryptic entries and initials JHEL, RC hinted at a wartime conspiracy, and the key's symbol matched the cipher's angular script. Miss Marple's mind as nimble as her knitting needles wove connections, Harrow's agitation over the coded letter, the secret meeting at the churchyard ridge, and now this journal, a record of his dangerous dealings. Someone in St. Mary Mead, killed to protect a secret, she thought, and this drawer held the key to it. A knock at the door interrupted her musings. Dennis, his freckled face flushed with excitement, burst in, clutching a crumpled newspaper. "Aunt Jane, you've got to see this. The Gazette says Lawrence Redding's still in custody, but there's talk of a stranger lurking near the vicarage. The night Harrow died." Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles, her lips pursing. "The Gazette thrives on sensation, dear, but a stranger is worth noting. Let's visit Griselda. I'd like another look at that study and a word with her about that drawer." They set off for the vicarage, the village alive with gossip. At the greengrocer's, Miss Marple overheard Mrs. Price prattling about a dark figure seen by the vicarage hedge, a tale no doubt inflated by the villagers' fertile imagination. Still, she thought, where there's smoke, there's often a spark. Griselda met them at the vicarage door, her auburn curls pinned more neatly today, though her eyes betrayed sleepless worry. "Jane, Dennis, thank goodness you're here," she said, leading them inside. Inspector Slack's been back, rummaging through the study again. "He's convinced Lawrence is guilty, but I just can't believe it." Miss Marple patted her arm. "Let's not despair, my dear. May we see the study? I'd like to examine that drawer more closely." Griselda hesitated, glancing toward the hall. Leonard's at a parish meeting, and Slack's off harassing someone else. "I suppose it's all right, but, Jane, that journal you found, it's giving me chills. What was Harrow doing with such things?" "That," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but firm, "is what we must uncover." The study was quieter now, the air heavy with the scent of old books and lingering tragedy. The oak desk stood like a sentinel, its locked drawer now a focal point of Miss Marple's curiosity. Griselda produced a spare Keelanards, kept in a biscuit tin, and opened the drawer again. It was empty, save for a faint dusting of tobacco, confirming Harrow's presence. But Miss Marple's keen eyes caught something new, a tiny notch in the drawer's interior, barely visible, as if something had been wedged there. She ran her finger along the notch, her mind racing. "Griselda, has this drawer been cleaned recently?" "Not since before the murder," Griselda said, frowning. "Why?" Miss Marple didn't answer, instead pressing the notch gently. A soft click echoed, and a hidden panel in the drawer's base sprang open, revealing a small, flat object wrapped in oilcloth. Griselda gasped as Miss Marple unwrapped it to find a cipher-wheeler brass disc etched with symbols matching the scrap, its outer ring marked with letters of the alphabet. "Good heavens," Griselda whispered. "What is it a tool for?" "Decoding," Miss Marple said, her voice steady but her eyes alight. "Harrow used this to write or read his coded messages. This is no ordinary village intrigue, my dear." Dennis, hovering nearby, leaned in. "Like spies in the war, Aunt Jane. Gosh, this is better than my novels." Miss Marple's lips twitched. "Less romantic than your novels, Dennis, but far more dangerous. We must keep this safe." She slipped the cipher wheel into her handbag, its weight a reminder of the stakes. Their discovery was interrupted by a sharp knock at the vicarage door. Griselda hurried to answer, returning moments later with a pale, trembling figure. Letters. Colonel Harrow's stepdaughter. The young woman, barely 20, with delicate features and wide, anxious eyes, clutched a lace handkerchief. Mrs. Clement, Miss Marple, I had to come, she said, her voice quavering. I heard about the murder, and I saw something that night I should have said sooner, but I was afraid. Miss Marple gestured to a chair, her tone soothing. Sit, my dear. Tell us everything. Letters perched on the edge of the seat, twisting her handkerchief. It was just before the gunshot. Around 9, I was walking by the vicarage. Father had sent me to fetch his pipe from home, but I dawdled. I saw a man, not from the village, near the gate. He was tall, with a scarf over his face, and he was watching the study window. When I called out, he ran off toward the lane. Griselda's eyes widened. A stranger. Did you tell, Inspector? Slack. Letters shook her head, her cheeks flushing. I was scared. Father was so angry that day, ranting about a letter. I thought, maybe it was my fault for not speaking up. Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her mind was sharp. A stranger, or someone posing as one? Lettice's nervousness suggested more than fear, perhaps guilt, or a secret of her own. You did right to tell us now, she said. Did this man carry anything? A bag, perhaps. Lettice frowned, thinking. I think he had a small case, like a doctor's bag. But it was dark, and I wasn't close. Miss Marple nodded, filing away the detail. A case, like Harrow's satchel, or something else. She glanced at Griselda, whose worry was palpable. Thank you, Lettice. We'll keep this between us for now. Griselda, might you make us some tea? I think we could all use it. As Griselda bustled to the kitchen, Miss Marple drew Dennis aside, lowering her voice. Lettice's story is interesting, but her hesitation troubles me. She's holding something back. Keep an eye on her, dear, but discreetly. Dennis nodded, his eyes gleaming with purpose, like a proper sleuth, Aunt Jane. Exactly, she said, her smile faint but encouraging, with Letty's calmed and sipping tea. Miss Marple turned her attention to the journal, flipping through its pages while Griselda and Lettice chatted nervously. The entries grew more urgent toward the end, with one passage catching her eye. Traitor's code secured. Must deliver to ally before they find me. Ridge 9, shadow. The word traitor sent a chill through her. Harrow was no saint, she thought, but a traitor. Or was he exposing one? She closed the journal, her fingers brushing the cipher wheel in her handbag. The wheel's symbols aligned with the scraps, and a quick test pairing the wheel's letters with the cipher's mark sealed it, a partial decode. Betray. The word betray confirmed her suspicions. Harrow's death was tied to a betrayal, perhaps from his wartime past, and the initials in the journal JHEL, a C pointed to villagers she knew. A sudden clatter from the hall broke her focus. Griselda rushed in, her face ashen. Jane, it's the study window, it's open. I'm sure I closed it this morning. Miss Marple hurried to the study, Dennis and Lettice trailing behind. The window, overlooking the garden, was indeed ajar, its latch forced. Outside, the grass was trampled, and a faint footprint too large for a woman's marked the soft earth. Someone was here, Miss Marple said, her voice calm but her eyes narrowing. They may have overheard us. Lettice gasped, her handkerchief fluttering to the floor. The killer. Oh, Miss Marple, what if they come for us? Nonsense, Miss Marple said briskly. They're after the letter, or what's left of. It weave the journal and the wheel, and they don't know that. We have the advantage. Griselda, wringing her hands, said, Jane, should we tell Slack? This is getting dangerous. Not yet, Miss Marple replied. Inspector Slack is thorough, but he lacks imagination. We'll keep this to ourselves until we know more. As Lettuce left, promising to stay silent, Miss Marple and Dennis returned to the cottage, the journal and cipher wheel safely tucked away. The village was settling into its evening routines, smoke curling from chimneys, the distant bark of a dog butt. Miss Marple felt the weight of unseen eyes. The killer is close, she thought, and they're desperate at her parlour table. She opened the journal again, her fingers tracing the initials. J.H. Dr. Haydock, whose whispered argument in the churchyard hinted at secrets. E.L. Mrs. Lestrade, whose past was a mystery. Arsira Carson, the reclusive archaeologist, perhaps. The cipher wheel, with its promise of decoding the full letter, was a breakthrough. But the open window and the footprint warned her. Time was short. She closed the journal, her resolve firm. Dennis, tomorrow we'll visit the churchyard again. There's more to find, I'm sure of it. But for now, we rest and we watch. The chapter closed with Miss Marple knitting by the fire, the cipher wheel glinting in her handbag. The locked drawer had yielded a vital secret, but the killer was circling, and St. Mary Mead's quiet lanes hid a truth that grew darker with each clue. Jane Marple, with her unyielding curiosity, was ready to unravel it, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 5. The artist's confession. The sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the village green as the church clock tolled 4. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass, but an undercurrent of unease pulsed through the lanes, fueled by whispers of Colonel Harrow's murder and Lawrence Redding's arrest. Miss Jane Marple, her lavender shawl draped over her shoulders, sat in her cottage parlour, the cipher wheel, journal, an etched key from the churchyard arranged before her like pieces of a chessboard. The journal's cryptic entries on it, J.H.E.L.R.C., and notes of a traitor's code had deepened the mystery, and the cipher wheel's partial decode, Kayad, betray, hinted at a betrayal that cost Harrow his life. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by a rap at the door. Dennis burst in, his freckled face alight with urgency. Aunt Jane, you won't believe it. I heard at the post office Slack's got Lawrence Redding locked up at the station, and they're saying he's confessed. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes narrowing. Confessed? That's unexpected. Lawrence is impulsive, but a murderer. I'm not convinced. Fetch your coat, dear. We'll pay him a visit. The police station, a squat brick building on the edge of the village, hummed with activity. Constables bustled about, their voices low, while villagers lingered outside, craning for a glimpse of the drama. Miss Marple, with Dennis in tow, approached the desk sergeant, her demeanour as unassuming as her tweed coat. Good afternoon, Sergeant Lake, she said, her voice mild. Might I have a word with Mr. Redding? As a friend of the vicar's, I feel a duty to offer comfort. Lake, a burly man with a soft spot for Miss Marple's scones, hesitated. Inspector Slack won't like it, ma'am, but 5 minutes. He's in the back cell. Lawrence Redding sat on a narrow cot, his dark hair dishevelled, his paint-stained hands clenched. The artist's usual charm was gone, replaced by a haggard defiance. When he saw Miss Marple, his eyes flicked up, wary but curious. Miss Marple, what are you doing here? Come to gloat like the rest of them? Not at all, she said, Settling on a stool Dennis dragged from the corner. "I've come to listen. They say you confessed, but I suspect there's more to your story." Lawrence's jaw tightened, and he glanced at Dennis, who hovered by the bars, wide-eyed. "Send the boy away," he muttered. "This isn't for his ears." Miss Marple nodded, and Dennis, though reluctant, stepped outside, alone with Lawrence. She leaned forward, her gaze steady. "Now, Mr. Redding, tell me the truth. What happened between you and Colonel Harrow?" Lawrence ran a hand through his hair, his voice low. "I didn't kill him, if that's what you think. But I did argue with him that day, at the Vicarage gate. He was blackmailing me." Miss Marple had that blasted letter full of symbols, like something out of a spy novel. "He said it proved I'd been selling sketches of military sites during the war, passing them to unsavory types." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. And was there truth to his claim? Lawrence flushed, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Not exactly. I was young, broke, and stupid. I sketched some old fortifications for a dealer in London. Thought it was just art. Harrow found out. Got hold of that letter somehow. Said he'd ruin me unless I paid him. I told him to go to blazes, but he laughed. Said the letter was his insurance." Miss Marple's mind raced. Blackmail. The letter was a weapon, not just a code. "Did you see this letter?" she asked. "Only a glimpse," Lawrence said. "Yellowed, covered in those odd marks. He waved it at me that afternoon, said he'd hidden it when no one would find it. Then, that night, he was dead." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers brushing the cipher wheel in her handbag. "And where were you when the shot was fired, Mr. Redding?" He hesitated, his eyes darting away. "By the river, sketching, I swear it. But I did pass the vicarage around 8:30. I saw a man, I think near the study. Window didn't get a good look. I was too angry to care." Miss Marple's lips pursed. "Another stranger, like Lettuce's tail. Or the same. Thank you, Lawrence. You've been most helpful. Keep your spirits up. Truth has a way of surfacing." As she rose, Lawrence grabbed the bars, his voice urgent. "Miss Marple, you believe me, don't you? I'm no saint, but I'm no killer." She met his gaze, her tone gentle but firm. "I believe you're telling part of the truth. The rest we shall see." Outside, Dennis was practically bouncing. "What did he say, Aunt Jane? Is he guilty?" "Not of murder, I think," she said, her mind already turning to the next step. "But he's entangled, and that letter is the key. We must learn more about Mrs. Lestrange. Her name is in Harrow's journal, and she was in the churchyard. Last night they headed toward the mill, where Mrs. Eleanor Lestrange lived in a grand ivy-covered house that seemed too large for one woman. The village whispered about her, a widow with no clear past, her sharp eyes and reserved manner fueling speculation. Miss Marple, ever cautious, chose a pretext for their visitor request for donations to the church flower. Fund. Mrs. Lestrange received them in a parlour adorned with heavy drapes and a single portrait of a stern-faced man in military garb. Her dark hair was swept into a severe bun, and her smile, though polite, didn't reach her eyes. "Miss Marple, young Dennis," she said, her voice smooth as polished stone. "To what do I owe this visit?" Miss Marple, settling into a plush chair, launched into her flower fund spiel, her eyes noting every detail. The locked desk in the corner, the faint scent of lavender, the way Mrs. Lestrange's fingers twitched when Harrow's name was mentioned. "Such a tragedy at the vicarage," Miss Marple said, her tone casual. Poor Colonel Harrow. I understand he was quite particular about his correspondence. Mrs. Lestrange's smile faltered, her hand tightening on her teacup. I barely knew the man. He kept to himself, didn't he? Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her gaze steady, though he seemed fond of cryptic letters. I heard he found one in the vicarage, full of symbols. Reminds me of wartime ciphers, fascinating things, don't you think? Mrs. Lestrange's eyes flicked to the desk, then back. I wouldn't know. I have no head for puzzles. Her voice was too sharp, and Miss Marple caught the lie. She knows more than she admits. As they sipped tea, Mrs. Lestrange let slip a single clue. The war left many scars, she said, almost to herself. Some men, like Harrow, carried their secrets to the grave. Betrayals, you know, linger. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Betrayal again. She steered the conversation to safer ground, but her mind was fixed on that locked desk. What are you hiding, Eleanor? Their visit was cut short by a piercing scream from the vicarage, audible even across the village. Miss Marple and Dennis hurried out, Mrs. Lestrange's cool farewell ringing in their ears. At the vicarage, they found Griselda in the garden, clutching a blood-stained glove grey, well-worn, with a faint tear at the thumb. I found it near the roses, she stammered. It wasn't here yesterday. Miss Marple examined the glove, her mind racing. The blood was dry, likely Harrow's, and the size suggested a man's hand, planted, perhaps, or dropped in haste. She wrapped it in her handkerchief, her voice calm. We'll keep this safe, Griselda. Don't tell Slack just yet. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple laid the glove beside the journal and cipher wheel. Dennis, pacing, said, "The glove, it's like the stranger letters saw, or the man Lawrence spotted. The killer's taunting us, isn't he?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, turning the cipher wheel. She aligned its symbols with the scraps, testing combinations. Slowly, a new fragment emerged. Lestrange, betrayer. Her breath caught. Eleanor Lestrange, named in the cipher, but as victim or villain. She closed the journal, her eyes gleaming. Dennis, the glove is a clue, but the cipher is the heart of this. Mrs. Lestrange is involved, and that scream tells me the killer is growing bold. We must be bolder. The chapter closed with Miss Marple knitting by her fire, the blood-stained glove a stark reminder of the danger closing in. The artist's confession had cracked open Harrow's blackmail scheme, and the cipher's latest revelation pointed to Mrs. Lestrange. St. Mary Mead's secrets were unraveling, and Jane Marple, with her quiet tenacity, was ready to follow the trail, one stitch at a time. Chapter 6. The traitor's code revealed the dusk settled over St. Mary Mead like a velvet curtain, softening the edges of the village's thatched roofs and cobblestone lanes. Yet the quiet was deceptive, a thin veneer over the tension that gripped. The village, since Colonel Harrow's murder, Miss Jane Marple sat at her parlour table, the cipher wheel glinting in the lamplight beside the leather journal. The etched key, the blood-stained glove, and the torn scrap of cipher. Her knitting lay untouched, her mind consumed by the latest revelation, the cipher's partial decode. Lestrange. Betrayer pointing to Mrs. Eleanor Lestrange, whose guarded demeanour and cryptic churchyard meeting with Dr. Haydock hinted at secrets tied to Harrow's death. The glove, found in the vicarage garden, suggested the killer's carelessness or a deliberate taunt. The journal's initials, JHEL, RCN, its mention of a traitor's code deepened the mystery, while Lawrence Redding's confession of blackmail painted Harrow as a manipulator whose schemes had deadly consequences. A wartime betrayal, Miss Marple mused, her eyes narrowing. The code is the key, and it's time to unlock it. A knock at the door broke her reverie. Dennis, his freckled face flushed from the evening chill, slipped inside, clutching a folded note. Aunt Jane, this was slipped under the vicarage door. Griselda found it an hour ago, addressed to you. Miss Marple unfolded the note, her fingers steady despite the prickle of unease. Inked in a hurried scrawl, it read, "Leave the code alone, or the vicarage will burn." No signature, only a crude symbol matching the cipher scrap. She handed it to Dennis, her voice calm. "Interesting. Our killer is nervous, and that makes them careless." Dennis's eyes widened. "Gosh, Aunt Jane, they know we've got the journal. Should we tell Inspector Slack?" "Not yet," she said, tucking the note into her handbag. "Slack would blunder in and scare our quarry. We need to decode the full cipher. The wheel is our best chance." They set to work, the cipher wheel's brass glinting as Miss Marple aligned its symbols with the scraps. Hours passed, the clock ticking past 9 as they tested combinations, the journal's underlined words, meet, shadow, 9, ridge, and the decoded fragment, the strange betrayer. Slowly, a pattern emerged. By aligning the wheel's outer letters with the cipher's marks and using shadow as a key, the full message materialized. Lestrange delivers traitor's code to buyer at manor. Miss Marple leaned back, her heart quickening. Harrow was no traitor, she said softly. He was brokering a stolen code, and Mrs. Lestrange was his courier or his target. The manor must be Old Hall, the abandoned estate beyond the ridge. Dennis's jaw dropped. Old Hall. That place is a ruin haunted, they say. You think the killer's there? Haunted or not, Miss Marple said, her eyes gleaming. It's where our answers lie, but we must be cautious. That note means someone's watching. The next morning, St. Mary Mead buzzed with fresh gossip. At the village shop, Miss Marple overheard Mrs. Cleet whispering about a ghostly light seen at Old Hall, fueling tales of spectres and smugglers. Nonsense, she thought, but the lights suggested activity, perhaps the killer covering their tracks. She resolved to investigate the manor, but first, she needed more information. She and Dennis called on Griselda, who was pale but resolute, stirring a pot of jam in the vicarage kitchen. "Jane, that glove you found, it's got me rattled," Griselda said. "And now this note. What's happening to our village?" Miss Marple patted her hand. "We're close to the truth, my dear. Tell me, has anyone been near Old Hall recently? Any visitors? Workmen?" Griselda frowned. "Not that I know of. It's been empty since the war. Though Dr. Haydock mentioned checking the place for vagrants last week. Said it was his civic duty." Miss Marple's lips pursed. J.H. James. "Haydock, in the churchyard, now at the manor. Thank you, Griselda. Dennis and I will take a walk. Fresh air does wonders." They set off for Old Hall, a crumbling estate on the village's edge, its stone walls choked with ivy and its windows dark. The manor's isolation made it a perfect hiding place, and the journal's mention of a buyer suggested a rendezvous. Gone wrong. As they approached, the air grew heavy, the scent of damp earth mingling with something sharp-witted, perhaps Dennis, clutching a stick like a weapon. Whispered Aunt Jane, "This place gives me the creeps. What are we looking for?" "Anything out of place," she said, her eyes scanning the overgrown path. Harrow's code was meant for someone here. Look for signs of footprint, a mark. They circled the manor, its sagging roof and broken shutters looming like a forgotten giant. At the rear, a boarded-up door hung loose, its nails freshly pried. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. "Someone's been here," she said, pointing to a scuff in the dirt, the same size as the vicarage footprint. Inside, the manor was a maze of dust and shadows, its halls echoing with their steps. Dennis's stick tapped nervously as they navigated, past rotting furniture and cobwebbed chandeliers. In a back room, Miss Marple spotted a fireplace, its hearth scattered with fresh ashes. Kneeling, she sifted through them, her gloved hands uncovering a torn map fragment, its edges charred, but showing a sketch of old hall and a marked room labelled safe. "Dennis, look," she said, holding up the fragment. "This is where Harrow planned to deliver the code. There's a safe here somewhere." They searched the room, tapping walls and floorboards. Dennis, his enthusiasm overriding his fear, pressed a panel behind a faded tapestry, and it clicked open, revealing a rusted safe embedded in the stone. Its lock bore a symbol matching the churchyard key. Miss Marple inserted the key, and with a groan, the safe opened, revealing a single item, another coded letter, its symbols identical to the vicarage scrap. She unfolded it carefully, her heart racing. "This is it," she said. "The traitor's code, or a copy. Harrow meant to sell it here." Before they could examine it further, heavy footsteps echoed from the hall, slow, deliberate, approaching. Dennis froze, his stick raised, but Miss Marple's hand steadied him. "Hide," she whispered, pulling him behind a mouldering sofa. The footsteps paused, and a low voice muttered, "They've been here, damn it." Miss Marple peered through a gap, catching a glimpse of a man's silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, with a hat pulled low. He carried a flashlight, its beam sweeping the room, lingering on the open safe. With a curse, he turned and fled, his boots thudding down the hall. Dennis exhaled, trembling. Who was that? Aunt Jane, the killer? "Perhaps," she said, clutching the letter. "Or someone else after the code. We must leave quickly." They slipped out a side door, the manor's shadows swallowing their escape. Back in the village, Miss Marple's cottage offered sanctuary, but the letter burned in her hands. She spread it on the table, the cipher wheel beside it, and set to work. The new letter was longer, its symbols denser, but the wheel, aligned with shadow, yielded a chilling message. Harrow to meet RC at Manor, code for sale. Lestrange, UNTRUSTED. Miss Marple's breath caught. R.C. Roger Carson, the archaeologist. The reclusive scholar, rarely seen outside his cluttered cottage, had no obvious link to Harrow, yet his initials stood out in the journal, and Mrs. Lestrange, untrusted. "Why?" Dennis, pacing, said, "We should check Carson's place, Aunt Jane. If he's RC, he might have the rest of the code." "Not yet," she said, her voice firm. "We have the letter, the wheel, and a name. But the manor was a trap someone knew we'd come. We must tread carefully." That evening, the village gathered for a tea party at the parish hall, a tradition Griselda insisted on despite the murder. Miss Marple attended, her eyes scanning the crowd. Dr. Haydock was there, his usual warmth strained, his gaze flickering when she mentioned Old Hall. Mrs. Lestrange, elegant in black, avoided her, while Roger Carson, a gaunt man with inked fingers, lingered in a corner, his eyes darting nervously. As the party wound down, Miss Marple slipped the map fragment into her handbag, her mind alight with connections. The traitor's code was revealed, but the killer was closing in, there. Desperation palpable. They've lost the letter, she thought, but they'll come for us next. The chapter closed with Miss Marple sipping tea by her fire, the coded letter hidden in her knitting basket. The Manor's secrets had deepened the mystery, and St. Mary Mead's quiet lanes hid a deadly truth. Jane Marple, with her relentless curiosity, was ready to follow the trail, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 7. The Manor's hidden room. The moon hung low over St. Mary Mead, its silvery light casting eerie shadows across the village's quiet lanes. Old Hall, the abandoned manor on the outskirts, loomed like a spectre against the night sky, its ivy-choked walls and broken windows whispering of forgotten secrets. Miss Jane Marple, her dark shawl blending with the darkness, led Dennis through the overgrown path to the manor's rear entrance. Her handbag held the coded letter from the manor's safe, the cipher wheel, the etched key, the blood-stained glove, and Harrow's journal, each a piece of the puzzle that had cost Colonel Harrow his life. The decoded message from the letter Harrow: to meet R.C. at Manor, code for sale. Lestrange, untrusted, had pointed them here, to the crumbling estate where Harrow planned to sell a wartime traitor's code. The initials R.C., likely Roger Carson, the reclusive archaeologist, suggested a new suspect, while Mrs. Lestrange's role courier or betrayer remained murky. The threatening note slipped under the vicarage door warned Miss Marple that the killer was watching, and the charred map fragment from the manor's fireplace marked a room with a safe. Tonight, she thought, we find what Harrow hid. Dennis, clutching a flashlight, whispered Aunt Jane. This place is worse at night. What if the killer's here? Miss Marple's eyes gleamed in the moonlight. If they are, dear, we'll be ready. Stay close and keep that light low. They slipped through the prid-open door, the air inside heavy with mildew and ash. The manor's halls were a labyrinth of decapiling wallpaper, splintered floorboards, and the faint squeak of mice. Miss Marple held the map fragment, its sketch guiding them past a collapsed staircase to a corridor lined with faded portraits. The marked room was at the end, its door ajar, creaking softly in the draught. Inside, the room was a study in ruin. A cracked desk, a toppled bookcase, and a fireplace with embers long cold. The tapestry from the map's description hung askew, its threads unraveling. Miss Marple pointed to the wall behind it. There, Dennis. The safe should be hidden. Dennis pulled the tapestry aside, revealing a stone panel with a faint outline. He pressed it, and with a groan, the panel slid open, exposing a second safe, larger than the first, its lock etched with the same symbol as the churchyard key. Miss Marple inserted the key, her hands steady despite the thud of her heart. The safe opened, revealing a single item, another coded letter, its paper crisp as if recently placed, its symbols matching the vicarage scrap. She unfolded it carefully, her breath catching. Another piece of Harrow's puzzle, she said. This is what he meant to sell Law, what someone killed to protect. Dennis's flashlight flickered, casting jittery shadows. What does it say, Aunt Jane? Can we decode it now? Not here, she said, tucking the letter into her handbag. It's too dangerous. But this confirms Old Hall was the heart of Harrow's scheme. Before they could retreat, heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor, deliberate, uneven, as if the intruder hesitated. Dennis's eyes widened, but Miss Marple's hand steadied him. Behind the desk, she whispered, pulling him into the shadows. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by a low hum, like someone muttering to themselves. A figure entered, their silhouette bulky in the moonlight, streaming through a cracked window. They carried a lantern, its glow revealing a gloved hand and a coat too heavy for the summer night. The figure approached the safe, cursing softly as they found it open. "Too late," they muttered, their voice muffled but male. Miss Marple strained to see more, but the lantern's light swung away as the figure rummaged through the desk, scattering papers. A glint caught her Aja small knife, dropped in haste, its blade etched with the same cipher symbol. The killers, she wondered. The figure froze, as if sensing eyes on them, and bolted from the room, their lantern clattering to the floor. Miss Marple waited, her heart pounding, then emerged, retrieving the knife. "Careful, Dennis," she said, wrapping it in her handkerchief. "This is evidence, and it's fresh." Dennis, trembling, whispered, "That was him, wasn't it?" "The murderer, or someone close to them," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but her mind racing. "They knew we'd come. That note wasn't a warning, it was a lure." They slipped out of the manor, the night air sharp against their skin. As they reached the village, the church clock struck midnight, its chimes a solemn reminder of the hour Harrow died. Miss Marple's cottage offered refuge, and she spread the new letter on her table, the cipher wheel beside it. Dennis, still shaken, watched as she aligned the wheel's symbols, using mana as the key. The message emerged slowly. RC. To receive code at 9. Harrow dead if betrayed. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Roger Carson was Harrow's buyer, or his accomplice. But the code mentions betrayal, perhaps. Carson turned on him. Dennis's eyes widened. "We should confront him, Aunt Jane. His cottage isn't far." "Not yet," she said, her tone firm. "We have the letter, the knife, and a name, but we need proof. Carson is clever, and the killer is desperate. We must be cleverer." The next morning, St. Mary Mead was alive with fresh rumours. At the bakery, Miss Marple overheard talk of a ghost at Old Hall, likely the lantern's glow from the night before. The village sees what it wants, she thought, but the knife in her handbag was no ghost. She and Dennis called on Griselda, who was frazzled, stirring a pot of soup in the vicarage kitchen. "Jane, the police are useless," she said. "Slack's still got Lawrence locked up, and now there's talk of a break-in at Old Hall." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "A break-in, interesting. Griselda, has Roger Carson been to the vicarage lately?" Griselda frowned. "Not since last month, when he borrowed a book on Roman artifacts." "Why, just curious," Miss Marple said, her mind noting the connection. Carson, an archaeologist with access to the vicarage, and RC in the journal, she decided to observe. Carson, indirectly, choosing the village fete as cover. The fete, held on the green, was a flurry of bunting and laughter, but Miss Marple's focus was on the crowd. Carson stood by the tombola stall, his gaunt frame hunched, his eyes darting as if expecting pursuit. Dr. Haydock, nearby, chatted with villagers, but his smile was strained, his glances lingering on Mrs. Lestrange, who hovered near the tea tent. Miss Marple, sipping lemonade, murmured to Dennis, "Watch Carson, dear. See if he speaks to anyone unusual." Dennis nodded, slipping into the crowd. He returned minutes later, his voice low. "Aunt Jane Carson was talking to a man I didn't recognize, with a limp like the footsteps we heard. They mentioned the manor and tonight." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. "The same man from last night. Well done. Dennis, we'll keep that in mind." As the fete wound down, a commotion erupted near the vicarage. Inspector Slack's car screeched to a halt, and he stormed out, shouting about a tip-off at Old Hall. Miss Marple and Dennis followed, at a distance, blending with the curious crowd. At the manor, Slack's men were combing the grounds, but the study room was untouched, the safe still open. Slack, red-faced, barked at a constable. "Someone's been here, damn it. Find me Prince." Miss Marple, unnoticed, slipped closer, her eyes catching a detail the police missed. A cigarette stub near the fireplace. Its brand matching Harrow's. Not the killer's, she thought, but someone close to him. She pocketed it discreetly, her mind racing. Back at her cottage, she laid out the new letter, the knife, and the cigarette stub beside the journal. The decoded message RC to receive code at 9 confirmed Carson's role, but the knife suggested another player. The man with the limp, she thought. Not Carson, but someone tied to the manor. "Dennis," she said, her voice steady. "We've stirred the hornet's nest. The killer knows we have the letter, and they'll act soon. Tomorrow we visit Roger Carson, but tonight we lock the doors." The chapter closed with Miss Marple by her fire, the coded letter hidden in her knitting basket. The manor's hidden room had yielded a crucial clue, but the killer's shadow loomed closer. Their desperation a palpable threat. St. Mary Mead's secrets were unraveling, and Jane Marple, with her relentless curiosity, was ready to face the next thread, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 8. The archaeologist's Alabitha morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns across the parlour table where her collection of clues lay, the cipher wheel, the etched key, the blood-stained glove, the journal, the coded letter from the manor's safe, and the cigarette stub from Old Hall. The knife, etched with a cipher symbol, rested beside them, a stark reminder of the killer's proximity. The decoded message RC to receive code at 9. Harrow, dead, if betrayed, pointed to Roger Carson, the reclusive archaeologist, as Harrow's intended buyer for the traitor's code. Yet the mysterious man with the limp, glimpsed at the manor, suggested another player in St. Mary Mead's deadly game. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind weaving connections. The threatening note, the churchyard meeting between Mrs. Lestrange and Dr. Haydock, and Lawrence Redding's blackmail. Confession all hinted at a wartime conspiracy that had boiled over into murder. Carson is the key, she thought, but is he the killer or another pawn? She resolved to confront him, but with caution. The killer's desperation was growing, and the cigarette stub suggested they were circling closer. Dennis burst through the door, his freckled face alight with news. "Aunt Jane, the village is buzzing. Slack's released. Lawrence Redding says there's not enough evidence. But they found a footprint at Old Hall, same as the one in the Vicarage garden." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "Interesting. And Roger Carsonani, talk of him." Dennis nodded. "Mrs. Cleet says he's been holed up in his cottage, but he was at the fete yesterday, talking to that limping man. People think he's odd, always digging up old bones." Miss Marple set down her cup. "Then we'll pay Mr. Carson a visit. But first, let's see Griselda. She may know more about his habits." At the vicarage, Griselda was arranging roses in a vase, her hands steadier, but her eyes still shadowed by worry. "Jane, it's a relief Lawrence is free, but Slack's hounding everyone now. He was asking about Roger Carson this morning, says he's suspiciously quiet." Miss Marple's lips twitched. "Suspiciously quiet is often just scholarly focus, my dear." "Has Carson been to the vicarage recently?" Griselda frowned. "Not since he borrowed that book on Roman artifacts. He's always poking about old sites. The manor has Saxon ruins. He's harmless, isn't he? Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her tone non-committal. Might I borrow your bicycle, Griselda? I'd like a ride to Carson's cottage. With Dennis pedalling beside her, Miss Marple cycled to the edge of the village, where Carson's cottage nestled against a copse of elms. Its garden was overgrown, littered with shards of pottery and rusted tools, a testament to his archaeological obsession. The door creaked open at her knock, revealing Roger Carson Gaunt, with ink-stained fingers and eyes that darted like a cornered hare. Miss Marple, he said, his voice dry as old parchment. And young Dennis. What brings you here? A neighbourly visit, she said, her smile disarming. May we come in? I've an interest in history, and I hear you're quite the expert. Carson hesitated, then stepped aside, revealing a cluttered parlour stacked with books, maps, and artifacts. A desk in the corner held a notebook, its pages open to a sketch of symbols matching the cipher. Miss Marple's pulse quickened, but she kept her gaze soft, wandering to a shelf of Roman coins. Fascinating work, Mr. Carson. Have you explored Old Hall recently? I hear it's rich with history. Carson's hands twitched. Old Hall, yes, I've surveyed it. Saxon foundations, possibly, but it's a ruin, nothing of value there. Miss Marple noted his unease, her voice gentle. I imagine you knew Colonel Harrow, then. He was fond of old places, wasn't he? Carson's eyes narrowed. Harrow, barely. He came to me once, asking about wartime codes. Thought I'd know something, being a scholar. I told him I study stones, not spies. Dennis, unable to resist, blurted, But you were at the manor, weren't you? The night he died. Cosette face paled, and Miss Marple shot Dennis a warning glance. My nephew is enthusiastic, she said smoothly, but we heard you were excavating that night, near the ridge. Quite a coincidence, with Harrow's murder so close. Carson's voice tightened. I was at the ridge, yes, digging for pottery. My assistant, Anne, can confirm it. I wasn't near the vicarage when Harrow was shot. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes lingering on the notebook. Of course. And this assistantin, is it? She's reliable, utterly, Carson said, too quickly. She's a student, lives in the next village. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. They left, the door closing sharply behind them. Dennis whispered, He's hiding. Something, Aunt Jane. That notebook, it's got the same symbols as the letter. Indeed, Miss Marple said, her mind racing. Carson knows more than he admits, but his alibi needs checking. She decided to seek out Anne, but first, they returned to the vicarage to examine the coded letter further. Griselda was in the garden, pruning roses, when they arrived. Jane, you're back. Any luck with Carson? Not yet, Miss Marple said, but I'd like another look at the study. Something about that desk bothers me. In the study, the air was heavy with the memory of Harrow's death. Miss Marple examined the desk, her fingers tracing the scratches near the locked drawer. She opened it with Griselda's key, finding nothing new but a faint scent of tobacco Harrow's brand lingered. He spent time here, she thought, planning his deal. As she closed the drawer, a shout from the garden startled them. Dennis ran to the window, spotting Lettice Prothero, Harrow's stepdaughter, hurrying toward the vicarage, her face flushed. Mrs. Clement. Miss Marple, she called, breathless. I have to tell you something, it's about Dennis. Griselda ushered her inside, and Lettice collapsed into a chair, her eyes bright with emotion. I didn't want to say before, but Dennis and I are engaged. Secretly, Father Colonel Harrow found out last week. He was furious, said Dennis was beneath me. He threatened to disinherit me unless I broke it off. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. And did you? Lettice shook her head, tears welling. No, but I was scared. That night, when I saw the stranger by the vicarage, I was coming to talk to Dennis. I think Father's anger had something to do with that letter. Miss Marple's mind clicked. A motive for Dennis. Unlikely, but it complicates things. Thank you, Lettice. You've been brave to tell us. Did Harrow mention anyone else? A man with a limp? Perhaps Lettice frowned. No, but he did. Say something about an old comrade betraying him. I thought he meant Dr. Haydock. Griselda gasped. Dr. Haydock? Surely not. Miss Marple's lips pursed. J.H. James Haydock, again. She thanked Lettice and sent her home, promising discretion. Alone with Dennis, she said, Your engagement is a surprise, dear, but it gives us a new angle. We must verify Carson's alibi with an R. They cycled to the next village, where Anne, a shy girl with ink-stained fingers, lived in a modest cottage. She confirmed Carson's story. They'd been digging at the ridge until 10 that night, but her hesitation, and a glance at a cipher-like sketch on her table, raised Miss Marple's suspicions. She's loyal, but nervous. Hiding something. Back in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple decoded the Manor's letter fully, using the cipher wheel and betray as the key. The message read, R.C. meets Harrow at Manor. Code delivers wealth, Lestrange suspected. S.P.Y. Her heart sank. Mrs. Lestrange, a spy, or a scapegoat. At the village hall that evening, a meeting to discuss parish funds offered a chance to observe. Suspects. Carson was there, his eyes avoiding Miss Marple's, while Dr. Haydock laughed too loudly at a joke, and Mrs. Lestrange lingered by the door, her face unreadable. Miss Marple noticed Carson slip a note to a man in the crowd tall. With a slight limp, the Manor intruder, she whispered to Dennis, Follow that man, dear, but stay out of sight. Dennis returned later, breathless. He went to the station, Aunt Jane, and caught a train. I heard him mutter about Carson's mistake. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Carson's alibi holds, but it's shaky. He's tied to the code. And that man with the limp is our next lead. We've rattled them, Dennis. The chapter closed with Miss Marple knitting by her fire, the coded letter and knife hidden in her basket. The archaeologist's alibi had cracks, and the limping man's shadow loomed large. St. Mary Mead's secrets were unravelling, and Jane Marple, with her relentless curiosity, was ready to tug the next thread, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 9. The trap is set. The evening draped St. Mary Mead in a hush. The villagers' lanterns casting golden pools along the cobblestone lanes. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of wood smoke, but beneath the calm lay a current of dread, as if the village sensed the noose tightening around Colonel Harrow's killer. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage parlour, her knitting idle as she studied her collection of clues, the cipher wheel, the etched key, the blood-stained glove, the journal, the coded letter from the Manor safe, the cigarette stub, and the knife with its telltale cipher symbol. The latest decoded message R.C. meets Harrow at Manor. Code delivers. Wealth, Lestrange suspected S.P.Y. had sharpened her focus on Roger Carson, the archaeologist, while the mysterious man with the limp glimpsed at the Manor and the village. Fate hinted at a broader conspiracy. Miss Marple's mind, as keen as the needles in her basket, wove the threads together. Lawrence Redding's blackmail confession, Letters Prothero's secret engagement to Dennis, and the churchyard meeting between Mrs. Lestrange and Dr. Haydock all pointed to a wartime betrayal that had erupted into murder. The threatening note, "The code alone, or the vicarage will burn," proved the killer was desperate, and Carson's shaky alibi, backed by his nervous assistant Anne, suggested he was more than a bystander. But who pulled the trigger? She wondered, and why now? Dennis burst through the door, his freckled face flushed from a run across the village. "Aunt Jane," I followed that limping man to the station again. He was on the phone, muttering about Carson's mess and cleaning it up tonight. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Well done, Dennis. Our killer is rattled, and that gives us an advantage. We need to draw them out, set a trap to force their hand." Dennis's eyes widened. "A trap? Like in my detective stories?" "How?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "By letting them think we've solved the cipher completely. We'll spread a rumor that I've decoded the final letter, and we'll reveal the traitor at the vicarage tonight. The killer won't resist. They'll come to stop us." Dennis grinned, but his voice trembled. "That's risky, Aunt Jane. What if they bring a gun?" "We'll have help," she said, her tone calm but resolute. "Inspector Slack may lack imagination, but he's thorough. We'll need his men discreetly placed." They headed to the vicarage, where Griselda was polishing silver, her hands unsteady. "Jane, I can't stand this tension," she said, setting down a candlestick. "The village is whispering about ghosts and spies, and now Lettuce says Dennis is in danger because of her engagement." Miss Marple patted her arm. There, my dear. We're close to the truth. I need your help to spread a little gossip. Tell Mrs. Cleet at the shop that I've decoded Harrow's letter and will share the details at the vicarage tonight at 9. Make it sound urgent." Griselda's eyes widened. "Gossip? Jane, you're not serious. That'll spread like wildfire." "Precisely," Miss Marple said, her lips twitching. "And we'll be ready when it does." She and Dennis then visited the police station, where Inspector Slack was sorting reports, his face red with frustration. "Miss Marple, I've no time for your theories," he snapped. "Carson's alibi checks out, and Redding's free. I'm chasing a vagrant Nowsome tramp seen near Old Hall." Miss Marple's voice was mild but firm. "Inspector, I believe the killer will act tonight. I've let it be known I've decoded Harrow's letter and will reveal the truth at the vicarage. At 9, I'd appreciate your men stationed nearby out of sight, of course." Slack's eyes narrowed. "You're meddling, ma'am. But if there's a chance to catch this devil, I'll play along. My men will be there, but if this is a wild goose chase, it won't be," Miss Marple said, her gaze steady. "The killer is desperate, and desperation breeds mistakes." By late afternoon, the rumor had spread, as Miss Marple knew it would. At the village shop, Mrs. Cleet's voice carried over the clink of coins. "Miss Marple's cracked the code, they say, naming the killer tonight at the vic." Villagers whispered, their eyes darting to the vicarage lane, and Miss Marple, sipping tea at the bakery, noted the tension in their glances. The bait is set, she thought. Now, who will bite? She prepared carefully, crafting a fake single page of gibberish symbols mimicking the cipher, designed to lure the killer. The real letter, journal, and cipher wheel remained hidden in her knitting basket, locked in a trunk beneath her bed. At dusk, she and Dennis returned to the vicarage, where Leonard, pale but resolute, met them in the hall. "Jane, Griselda told me your plan," he said, his voice low. "Is it safe?" After that note, as safe as it can be, Miss Marple said, patting his arm. Inspector Slack's men are hidden in the garden. We'll be in the study with the fake letter. On the desk, the killer will come for it. Dennis, clutching a cricket bat, whispered, "What if it's Carson, or that limping man?" "We'll soon find out," Miss Marple said, her eyes scanning the study. She placed the fake letter prominently, its symbols bold in the lamplight, and positioned herself by the window where she could see the garden path. Dennis hid behind a bookcase, his bat ready, while Leonard hovered near the door, his faith tested by the night's danger. The clock ticked toward 9, each second heavy. In the silent vicarage, outside, the garden was dark, save for the faint rustle of Leverslack's men, or something else. Miss Marple's heart thudded, but her hands were steady, her mind sharp. The killer wants the code silenced. They'll come at 9 sharp. A shadow moved at the study window, the latch clicking softly. Miss Marple held her breath as the window eased open and a figure slipped inside, their coat heavy, their steps uneven, a limp. The lamplight caught their face, and Miss Marple's eyes widened. Dr. Haydock. He moved to the desk, his gloved hands seizing the fake letter. His face, usually warm, was taut with fear, his eyes darting as he scanned the symbols. "It's here," he muttered, his voice low. "Thank God." Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice calm but piercing. "Good evening, Dr. Haydock." Looking for something, Haydock froze, the letter crumpling in his fist. "Miss Marple, this isn't what it seems. I was checking for evidence." "Indeed," she said, her gaze unwavering. "Then why sneak through the window? And why the glove? Another, I presume, to match the one in the garden." Haydock's face crumpled, and he sank into a chair, the letter falling to the desk. "I didn't want to kill him," he whispered. "Harrow was blackmailing me, had proof I sold secrets during the war, medical supplies to the enemy. I was young, desperate. He found the code, threatened to expose me unless I paid. That night, I went to the vicarage to reason with him, but he laughed, waved that letter. I shot him." Miss Marple's heart sank, but her voice was steady. "And the code, you took it." Haydock nodded, his eyes haunted. "Burned it. But you kept finding pieces, the journal, the wheel. I sent that note to scare you off, but you wouldn't stop." Dennis emerged, his bat lowered, his face pale. "Dr. Haydock, you." Before Haydock could reply, Inspector Slack burst through the door, his men behind him. "Got you," he barked, seizing Haydock's arm. "Miss Marple, you were right. We heard everything." Haydock didn't resist as the constables cuffed him, his shoulders sagging. Miss Marple watched, her mind piecing together the final threads. The glove, the cigarette stub, the limping man Haydock covering his tracks. She handed Slack the fake letter, keeping the real clues hidden. "You'll find his confession sufficient, Inspector," she said. "The rest is incidental." As Haydock was led away, Leonard and Griselda rushed in, their faces a mix of shock and relief. "Jane, you did it," Griselda cried. "But how did you know?" "A hunch," Miss Marple said, her lips twitching, "and a bit of gossip, well placed." Back at her cottage, she sat by the fire, the real letter and cipher wheel safe in her trunk. The trap had worked. Haydock's desperation, his undoing. But was he alone? She wondered, thinking of Mrs. Lestrange's cryptic words and Carson's nervous glances. The code was gone, but its shadows lingered. The chapter closed with Miss Marple knitting, the village settling into uneasy peace. The killer was caught. But St. Mary Mead's secrets held one final twist, and Jane Marple, with her relentless curiosity, was ready to unravel it, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 10. The Village Restored. The morning sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a gentle glow, its rays glinting off the dukest roses that lined the village lanes. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of freshly baked bread from the bakery, but a quiet reverence hung over the village, as if it exhaled after days of holding its breath. The arrest of Dr. James Haydock for Colonel Harrow's murder had sent ripples through St. Mary Mead, and though the killer was in custody, whispers of secrets and codes lingered like morning mist. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage parlour, her knitting needles clicking softly. The cipher wheel, etched key, blood-stained glove, journal, coded letter, cigarette stub, and knife arranged before her like relics of a battle won. The trap she'd set at the vicarage had worked Haydock's confession, spurred by the fake-coded letter, had unravelled the heart of the mystery. Yet questions remained. The role of Mrs. Eleanor Lestrange, the significance of Roger Carson's initials in the journal, and the shadowy man with the limp. A puzzle solved is no less complex, Miss Marple thought, her eyes gleaming behind her spectacles. But the village deserves peace, and I shall give it. A knock at the door heralded Griselda, her auburn curls tamed for once, her face alight with relief. "Jane, you're a marvel," she said, settling into a chair. "The whole village is talking about how you caught Dr. Haydock, but I still can't believe it our doctor, a murderer." Miss Marple poured tea, her voice gentle. "Human. Nature is often surprising, my dear. But let's clear the fog. I'd like you and Leonard to hear the full story letters, and Dennis, too. Shall we meet at the vicarage?" Griselda nodded, her eyes wide. "I'll fetch them. Leonard's been praying for answers, and Lettice is a wreck since her death." At the vicarage, the study once a scene of bloodshed was now a haven of warmth, its windows open to let in the summer breeze. Leonard, his clerical collar slightly askew, greeted Miss Marple with a weary smile. Lettice Prothero, her delicate features softened by hope, sat beside Dennis, their hands clasped, their secret engagement no longer a burden. Miss Marple settled into an armchair, her handbag at her side, and began. "It began with Colonel Harrow's dinner," she said, her voice steady. "He was a man of secrets, wielding a coded letter like a weapon. That letter, found in this study, was no ordinary note. It was a wartime cipher detailing a traitor's dealings. Harrow, a retired officer, had uncovered it, perhaps during his service, and saw it as a means to wealth through blackmail." Leonard frowned. "But why here? Why the vicarage?" Miss Marple's lips twitched. "Your study, Leonard, is a crossroads of the village open to all, yet private. Harrow used it to hide his letter, knowing it would be safe among your papers. But someone else knew Dr. Haydock." Griselda gasped. "Haydock? How did you know it was him?" "The clues told me," Miss Marple said, producing the blood-stained glove. "This, found in your garden, matched the one Haydock wore when he crept into the study last night. The cigarette stub at Old Hall was his brand, and the knife we found there bore the cipher's singular mark of his panic. But it was the churchyard that first pointed to him." Dennis's eyes widened. "The churchyard? When we saw him with Mrs. Lestrange?" "Exactly," Miss Marple said. "That night they argued about a debt tied to the war. Haydock, as a young medic, sold medical supplies to the enemy, a secret Harrow uncovered. The journal listed initials J.H. for James Haydock, E.L. for Eleanor Lestrange, R.C. for Roger Carson. Harrow was blackmailing Haydock, threatening to expose him unless he paid. Lettice's voice trembled. But my stepfather, he was cruel. But why kill him? Miss Marple's gaze softened. Harrow's greed was his undoing. He planned to sell the traitor's code to a buyer, Roger Carson, I suspected, based on the decoded letter from the manor's safe. But Haydock couldn't let that happen. The night of the murder, he confronted Harrow here, in this study. Harrow laughed, waved the letter, and Haydock, in a moment of desperation, shot him. Leonard rubbed his temples. And the letter, it's gone, isn't it? Burned, Miss Marple said, as Haydock confessed. But we found fragments, the scrap under the chair, the coded letter in the manor's safe. The cipher wheel unlocked their meaning, revealing Harrow's plan to meet Carson at Old Hall. Haydock, fearing exposure, stole the original letter and burned it, but he couldn't find the journal or the wheel. Griselda's eyes widened, and Mrs. Lestrange, the cipher, called her a spy. Miss Marple's smile was faint. That was the final twist. After Haydock's arrest, I visited Mrs. Lestrange. She admitted her true role, not a spy, but a government agent sent to St. Mary Mead to recover the traitor's code. Harrow had stolen it during the war, intending to sell it to foreign buyers. Mrs. Lestrange was tracking him, posing as a widow to blend in. Her meeting with Haydock in the churchyard was to warn him. She suspected his involvement but lacked proof. Dennis leaned forward. And Roger Carson, was he the buyer? Miss Marple shook her head. A red herring, I'm afraid. Carson's initials were in the journal, but he was merely a scholar Harrow consulted about ciphers, hoping to decode the letter himself. Carson's assistant, Anne, confirmed his alibi. He was digging at the ridge when Harrow died. The man with the limp seen at the manor and the fate was Haydock's brother, a former soldier who helped him cover his tracks. The limp was from an old war wound, and the cigarette stub tied him to Old Hall. Lettice clasped Dennis's hand. So it's over. The village is safe. As safe as villages ever are, Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. The code is gone. Haydock is in custody, and Mrs. Lestrange has what she needs to close her case. You and Dennis can plan your wedding without fear. Griselda's face lit up. A wedding, oh Jane, that's the first good news in days. Leonard smiled, his faith restored. You've done wonders, Jane, but how did you piece it all together? Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. People, Leonard, are like my knitting patterns, emerge if you watch closely. Harrow's arrogance, Haydock's guilt, Lestrange's secrecy, they all left threads. The glove, the journal, the cipher, they were stitches in the same cloth. As they sipped tea, the vicarage filled with laughter, the tension of the past days dissolving. Miss Marple handed the blood-stained glove and knife to Inspector Slack later that day, keeping the journal and cipher wheel as mementos. Slack, grudgingly impressed, muttered about amateur sleuths, but promised Haydock's trial would be swift. That evening, Miss Marple strolled to the churchyard, where the ridge lay quiet under the stars. The etched key, now useless, rested in her pocket, a reminder of the secrets it had unlocked. She paused by the oak where she'd overheard Haydock and Lestrange, her thoughts drifting to the village's resilience. St. Mary Mead endures, she mused, because its heart beats true. Back at her cottage, she sat by the fire, her knitting a soft counterpoint to the night silence. The village was restored, its gossip turning to weddings and harvest fairs. Lettice and Dennis, freed from Harrow's shadow, planned a spring ceremony. While Griselda vowed to host the grandest reception the vicarage had seen, Mrs. Lestrade, her mission complete, would soon leave. Her true identity a secret Miss Marple would keep. As the clock struck 9, the hour of Harrow's death, Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking. The traitor's code was gone, its betrayals buried. She thought of Haydock, his life undone by a moment's weakness, and of Harrow, whose greed had invited death. Human nature, she thought, is the truest cipher of all. The chapter and the story closed with Miss Marple sipping tea in her garden the next morning, the village humming with life. The roses bloomed, the church bells rang, and St. Mary Mead was whole again. Jane Marple, with her quiet wisdom and relentless curiosity, set her knitting aside, content that the village's darkest threads had been unravelled, one careful stitch at a time.